We're here again in the show of Lecha Dodi. We're going to speak today about the Halachot of Tisha B'Av that's coming, and we need to go through them one by one and see what's mutar and what's asur. The Shulchan Aruch starts off in Siman Tuf Kuf Nun Daled with the following words: Tisha B'Av asur birchitza. One is not allowed to wash on Tisha B'Av. Sicha is not allowed to rub ointments for pleasure on Tisha B'Av. He's not allowed ne'ilat sandal, which means leather shoes. תשמיש המיטה ואסור לקרוא בתורה, נביאים וכתובים, ולשנות במשנה ובמדרש ובגמרא, בהלכות והאגדות, which means one is not allowed to learn Torah on Tisha B'Av. Because it says in the Torah, פיקודי השם ישרים משמחי לב. The Torah, which is פיקודי השם, rejoices the heart. And therefore, on Tisha B'Av, since it's asur, one doesn't learn Torah. That's besides the obvious tisurim of not eating or drinking, and we have to go through each one of them and understand them. You come to the question of rechitza. Rechitza, the Shulchan Aruch says that you're not allowed to wash any parts of the body. It's not a complete body only, also, but you're not allowed also any part of body. So therefore, the Shulchan says, רחיצה אסורה בתשעה באב, בין בחמין, בין בצונן, אפילו להושיט אצבעו במים אסור. You're not allowed to wash any limbs of the body, even a small finger, whether you're using hot water or cold water, even though it's not necessarily for pleasure, one is not allowed to wash any parts of the body. And therefore, when one wakes up in the morning and he needs to wash netilat yadayim, how would he do that? How would a person wash netilat yadayim in a way that it would be mutar? So you need to know that many of the things actually are mutar because they're not necessarily rechitza shel ta'anug, which means if one wakes up in the morning and he wants to wash just to take off the tumah, that kind of rechitza is mutar to wash on Tisha B'Av, because all you're doing is just washing off the tum'ah that's on the hands. Same thing would apply if one went to the bathroom. He's allowed to wash his hands because that's the way you're trying to take out the tum'ah and clean your hand after the bathroom. Same thing would be before tefillah. The halacha requires every person to wash his hands before he prays tefillah, and therefore on Tisha B'Av, that would be allowed as well. This is how the Aruch HaShulchan writes, this is how Kaf HaChaim writes, and those halachot are permitted in such a way. But when you do it, the halacha is that you need to do it up to kishrei etzbeotav, which means up to the knuckles, the end of the fingers, where it connects to the hand itself. And therefore, one should wash only up to that part and not more than that. But it says in the Orchot Rabbeinu, in the name of the Chazon Ish, that one doesn't have to be very, very precise, make sure that it's exactly here. Rather, he takes the negavaser, he washes over. If it gets a little bit over, that is fine. You don't have to be medakdek exactly where the water goes, because that's not called rechitza shel ta'anug. Since you're washing it and you're required to wash it for the things we mentioned when you wake up in the morning, when you come out of the bathroom, and when you're ready to get to pray. So therefore, that's not called rechitza shel ta'anug. Even if it gets a little bit over, it's not necessarily davar asur, it would be mutar. So therefore, that would lead us also to other heterim that one can do when he needs to wash any part of the body, and that is what it says in the Shulchan Aruch in Seif Tet. אם היו ידיו מלוכלכות בטיט ובצואה, מותר לרחוץ להעביר הלכלוך. If his hands or any other part of the body would be dirty, he's allowed to wash the dirt. לא ייטול כל ידיו אלא לפי הצורך להעביר הלכלוך. Once you're washing the dirt of the body, or let's say it's on the hands as the Shulchan Aruch is talking, you can't wash the whole hand. You have to wash off only that part that got too dirty. Once you wash that off, you can't keep on washing those places. So this is something that one needs to be careful. And the reason it will be mutar to wash the dirt off is, we explained before, and the Mishnah Berurah brings here, אינו אסור אלא רחיצה של תענוג. The only rechitza that Chazal restricted is washing that bring you pleasure. but if it doesn't bring you pleasure in any way, rather just takes off the dirt, that's mutar. And therefore, נשים המבשלות צריכות לרחוץ הבשר, אף שממילא רוחצות גם ידיה, mutar. If a woman washes the food that she needs to prepare, so let's say she has meat and she needs to wash it, or anything else that she needs to wash, that's fine, although the hands are getting wet. So that would be nafka mina, for instance, for a woman that wants to diaper her kid, or she needs to wash her kid, and with that, the hands are also getting a little bit washed, that would be mutar. That's not, and this halakha would continue, that one can take that also. It's something that's on the hair that normally you would consider hair parts or the beard part also as part of the body, one is not allowed to wash normally, but if it got dirty, we're saying over here that it would be mutar. But again, when you wash, you have to wash just whatever's needed. If one has a headache, a very strong headache, and he needs to wash his face in order to let go of some of the pain so he can continue fasting, so then the Gilion Marsha says that it's allowed, because again, it's not considered washing off ta'anug, rather it's washing off tsar. Now, if a person has a headache, that's definitely requires we should take a Tylenol at that moment in order for the headache to go away. And if the headache doesn't go away with all that, it could be that it would be exempt from the ta'anit altogether, because he would have of mitzaer, or if a person, so at the point that he needs to lie down, that's somebody who's choleh, is a sick person, and one sick, he feels that he needs to go and lie down. Shmuel Kamenetsky says that it's not that measurement, it's not that shiur, rather it's not like on Shabbat in Shin Kafchet that over there, that's the din of somebody is considered choleh she'en bo sakana. Rather, anybody that gets weaker than the regular, although he doesn't have to lie down, that's already good enough for him to go and break the fast when he becomes with such a headache or with such weakness or anything like that, like for instance dehydrated, that becomes dangerous, person that starts throwing up or anything like that. Katan, a little kid also should not wash on the ta'anit, since it's not something that he must do. Magen Avraham says it's better that he should not wash, and the only thing that you'll be able to wash a katan is he's under the age of chinuch, or that he got dirty, as we said before. If a kid can't tolerate it, he's not obligated to suffer on Tisha B'Av. But if he's not in a need to go and wash on Tisha B'Av, he doesn't need to take a bath, so it's better that he shouldn't wash on Tisha B'Av. If it's a hot day and he's very sweaty and it's hard for him, then you can put him in a bath. And therefore, we said overall that one is allowed to wash the food. How about doing dishes? So we need to know that cleaning dishes, we're saying that if it has food over there in places that bugs could come, definitely would be mutar to wash. But overall, a person should not be wasting his day with doing housework. And even ladies in the house should not do housework, as it's brought down in many, many sfarim, that all kind of housework should not be done, especially before chatzot. It's better even not to do it after chatzot, although there are some women that the sfarim bring down from Italy and other places around the world that feel that after chatzot, since the Mashiach is born, they're going out of their way to rub and clean the house very, very well. But the poskim say that that's not a minhag that should be practiced, and one should avoid doing such work. But if one needs to do some things, he should leave it for after chatzot. So therefore, if a woman needs to cook food, the halakha in Shulchan Aruch says that one should not prepare the food before chatzot, before midday, which usually comes around 1 o'clock, rather afterwards. And that with an exception if she has to do a very large amount of food and she's not going to have the time, and what we call tzorkei harabim, let's say cooking for a large amount of place, a place in the camp, some kind of school, places like that that have large amount of people that you'll have to start beforehand. Or if it's done as for a mitzvah, you're cooking for people that are sick, for a woman that gave birth, whatever it is for a mitzvah, then it would be mutar to prepare beforehand, because that's considered not anymore preparing for yourself, rather for the mitzvah, and therefore such a thing would be mutar. But otherwise, just cooking should not be done before chatzot. It's better not to prepare anything even after chatzot. Like for instance, to do laundry is definitely one shouldn't do, because the issur of doing laundry is even before Tisha B'Av, kol sheken in Tisha B'Av itself. Also, for instance, folding the clothing and arranging them also should be avoided at that time, because that takes a person away from the avelut. The issur of all that is because it's masiach dat min avelut. When a person is busy doing things and with that he takes his mind off the avelut, that is wrong. One should have his mind constantly on the avelut, and therefore the issur melacha comes to tell us that you can't go to work on that day. Why not? Because when you go to work, you masiach dat min avelut. This is how the Shulchan Aruch brings down. Although it depends on the minhag of the place that you live in, but the halacha is that today everybody is considered under that minhag of not doing melacha. This is how the poskim bring down, and therefore, since today it's considered nagu shelo la'asot melacha in any place, one shouldn't go to work on Tisha B'Av. If one must go to work, so he should do it after chatzot. There will be sometimes that one will be permitted to go to work, and that is if, for instance, it's davar ha'aved. If he's not going to go to work, he's going to lose his thing that he needs to do. Or, for instance, let's say he doesn't go to work, his boss is going to fire him, that's davar ha'aved. Or if a great deal came about and he has a great business deal opportunity, he doesn't want to lose it, he could have doing it because it's considered davar ha'aved. But otherwise, one should not do not only business or work, but any even minor thing, as long as it's not just, if it takes only a couple of seconds to do, that is fine. But if it takes time, it stretches that act that you're doing. Let's say you need to sew a button, things like that, that one shouldn't do normally, even before Tisha B'Av, as we explained. If it's a new thing, if it's an old thing, one could do it before Tisha B'Av. But on Tisha B'Av, since it takes time, that time that you're spending on it, your mind gets off Tisha B'Av, off the avelut. It's called masiach dat min avelut. One should be careful not to do that on Tisha B'Av even after chatzot. Unless, again, it's a very minor thing, it takes very, very quickly, then it's not considered davar masiach dat min avelut, and that would be mutar to do. When you do something that has to do with davar aved, as we explained before, the halacha says that one should not do it befarhesia. Rather, you should do it privately. When you do it privately, people don't see it, it's a little bit better. But again, only when it's davar aved, when you must do it, and privately. It says in the Shulchan Aruch, in Seif Kaf Bet, that mutar al yadei eno Yehudi afilu bebeto, which means even if you hold that it's asur to do melacha, like the minhag is, but if you have a goy doing it, it's mutar, then it's permitted. And it says in the Mishnah Berurah, achen livnot binyan de'av shamilta asur afilu al yadei akum, which means once you do a melacha with a goy, it doesn't permit you to do anything you want, only things that are not av shamilta, not everybody seeing it around. So if you see a goy doing construction in the house, fixing places, doing things publicly for the Jew, and everybody can see and tell that he's doing it for the Jew, that's considered av shamilta, something that's very famous. People see it and it makes over here an impression that there's a goy that's working for a Jew. That also should be avoided, and it should not be done even with a goy. But if the goy is not doing it in such a way that everybody's seeing it, it's more on a private side, then it's mutar to do it with a goy. There's no isur doing melacha on Tisha B'Av with a goy. And it says in the Shulchan Aruch That's a halacha in Shulchan Aruch. Normally such a thing would not come to the Shulchan Aruch, but the Shulchan Aruch tells us that if one did a melacha, he made a melacha on Tisha B'Av, he went to work, he profited from this, no ro'eh siman bracha me'ota melacha, which means the blessing is not going to be on that money that he made, and he's going to lose the profit that he made over here. So therefore, one needs to think twice if he wants to do such a thing, even if he has to. So then he needs to do it only in a private way and after chatzot if possible. If he can't even do it after chatzot, as an example we said before, his boss requires him to come on time, or then he might lose his job. That's considered a real davar aved. One could go to work at that matter. But that takes us also again to the work around the house, that you need to be very careful of what you're doing. Not everything is allowed, even around the house. One needs to be careful. Another thing that we want to speak about, when we're learning over here, we said that the Shulchan Aruch mentions rechitza, and then he mentions sicha. What sicha? Sicha means rubbing all kind of ointments on your body. Now, the only sicha that's asur is sicha of something that brings you pleasure. So that means you take creams, hand creams, and you put it around your hand. That gives you some kind of good feeling, a place that you put the cream. But because they're not sicha shel ta'anug. Like for instance, if one needs to put creams, the ointments for all kind of rash that he has, something else that he needs to rub around his body, that's for medication or anything like that, that would be mutar. About if you have, if a person doesn't smell good and he wants to put deodorant, that would also be mutar because it's not sicha shel ta'anug. It's just to take away the bad smell that he has. Another thing that people need to be careful, that is the makeup on Tisha B'Av. Ladies should not put makeup on Tisha B'Av because when you put, for instance, lipstick, that's considered sicha, that's considered rubbing something on your body. And Moshe Feinstein was posek that you're not allowed to do such a thing. One needs to be careful not to put any kind of body, although even sometimes it's without smearing it on the body. Like for instance, it's a powder, such a thing, Moshe Feinstein says that it's not for Tisha B'Av. Other things that we need to know, that although we said it's asur to put all kind of makeup on the body, but if we have a kala that just got married within 30 days, over here we would allow her to put all kind of makeup in order that she should look good for her newly wed husband. And this is how the Kaf HaChaim brings down in the Mishnah Berurah. Another thing that is permitted for every man and woman, and that is to put, besides the deodorant we spoke before, but to put also perfumes. Since the person on Tisha B'Av tends to sweat and doesn't smell good, and there's a problem with Kvod HaBriot, it's a dignity of a person to look and smell representable, and therefore putting some kind of perfume could be that would be mutar. This is how it seems like from what Chazal only restricted sicha shel ta'anug. If it's not done for ta'anug, it's not done in order to smell good, rather to take away the bad smell, such a thing would be mutar. And with that, we're coming to the next halacha of neilat hasandal. Neilat hasandal, that's the next thing that the halacha in the beginning of Taf Kuf Nun Daled restricts, and that is wearing the shoes. When you wear shoes, that's problematic. You can't wear leather shoes on Tisha B'Av. So what should a person wear? One is allowed to wear shoes that are man-made or any other fabric except leather. What about something that's leather look-alike? It looks exactly like leather. Should you be able to wear it? Well, logically, you are allowed to wear it. But what about the problem of maritime? People are seeing you wearing black, leather-looking shoes. They might think that you're wearing over here leather. Is that davar hamutar? So that is brought down also in the Sfarim, that it would be permitted. And the reason it's permitted, because such a thing we're considering that there's no isur of marit ayin. The reason for that is brought down in many sfarim about other things that are common. Whenever you have something that's very common, you don't have to worry about marit ayin. For instance, it says like this, same idea in Divrei Malkiel and in Betzel HaChochmah, that when you're eating something, let's say you're eating meat, and you have something that looks like milk, let's say you have coffee with, you have a powder inside, now it looks like you're drinking coffee with milk, but since today it's very common to have those powders that are not the dairy, there's no isur anymore of marit ayin on such a thing. Marit ayin would apply only when you're doing something that really looks like you're doing isur, but since today it's common, so therefore people are not going to suspect you. This is how it's brought down in some poskim that say that over here would be the same halacha, that one could wear such shoes. Shoes is exception for ktanim, which means although you have a child and he doesn't have to do any of the restrictions of Tisha B'Av, he could eat, he could drink. We said that it's better not to wash him, but halachically would be allowed to wash him if he needs to wash. And all the other things that are restricted on Tisha B'Av also would be uplifted for Katan. But Neilat sandal, it's better not to put him leather shoes. And the reason for that is because there's no difference for him if he wears leather shoes or non-leather shoes. And therefore such a thing would be mutar. Although Chacham Ovadia in Chazon Ovadia brings opinions that today the leather shoes are mutar even for a katan, because all Chazal only said that it's fine for the katan not to wear, that katan should not wear leather shoes. That was in their time when there was a big difference between the two. Today, that if a katan wears leather shoes or non-leather shoes, it would make a difference for him. Back then, it wouldn't make so much of a difference for him. That's how he explains. He brings some poskim that say like that. Therefore, he says that the katan could wear leather shoes, but most of the poskim would say that the katan should try not to wear those leather shoes. One should not get him such a thing, give him such a thing. Rather, it should be mechanech that you should wear the rubber shoes as well. When you have those leather shoes, sometimes they have a buckle that's made out of leather, and although the rest of the shoe is not leather, but since you have the buckle on top, you have to know, is it mutar or asur? So it depends. If it's just to hold the feet, just to close up the shoe, that would be davar mutar. But if it holds the feet, it's a large piece that holds the feet, it's not allowed anymore. If you have a design on the shoes that are made out of leather, design doesn't hold the shoe, it would be davar hamutar. Some people think that the issur of wearing leather shoes also applies to belts, and that is wrong. It does not apply to belt, and one is allowed to wear those belts on Tisha B'Av and on Yom Kippurim as well. When we deal with the issur of brushing teeth, we come to shtifa, rechitza. Rechitza also has a issur of washing your teeth, brushing your teeth. Is that mutar? The Shulchan Aruch says that one is not allowed to wash his mouth on Tisha B'Av. Although in other Ta'aniyot it says in the Shulchan Aruch in Taf Kuf Samech Zayin, Hasharui beta'anit yachol lit'om k'dei revi'it u'bilvad she'iflot. When a person is in the Ta'anit, he could put water in his mouth and spill it out. But on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippurim, he should not do that. Now, the Shulchan Aruch is really contradicting himself, because later on he says that Misha darko lirchotz piv b'shacharit beta'anit tzibur lo kasher lemei badachi. A person should not wash his mouth at all in Ta'anit tzibur. So why in the beginning of the halacha I said that it's fine to use up to revi'it in Ta'anit tzibur and spill it out? The answer to that, says Magen Avraham, and this is brought down in Chazon Ovadia Arbaat Ta'aniyot, right in the beginning he says that the Magen Avraham explains that it up to a revi'it, it's fine to wash your mouth. You wash your mouth, you put your head downward so it doesn't come into the body, and you wash your mouth and let go, and you rinse it and you let go. That is fine. So that's how the Chacham Ovadia is posek. It depends if you're using Revi'it or more than Revi'it. More than Revi'it you're not allowed to do. Revi'it you are allowed to do. But the Shulchan Aruch says that on Tisha B'Av one needs to be not allowed to do such a thing, and therefore most of the people would be machmir on Tisha B'Av not to put any water in the mouth at all. And this is how the Mishnah Berurah is posek. Also, he says that lo kasher lemei badachi, and the only time you can allow such a thing is b'makom tsar. On a regular ta'anit, if a person has tsar, not washing his mouth, he's allowed to wash his mouth. במקום צער יש להתיר רחיצת פה במים בכל תענית ציבור. רק שיזהר, when you do that, you have again to lean forward in order that the water is not going to get inside the mouth and inside the body. ייזהר לחוף ראשו בפיו למטה שלא יבוא לגרונו. ואפילו בתשעה באב יש להתיר כשהוא לא צער גדול. The only, on תשעה באב it's most restricted. The Mishnah Berurah says it has to be mutar only במקום צער. On תשעה באב it has to be בצער גדול, a very strong suffering, which means not suffering, but a person that really suffers without washing his mouth. And Yom Kippurim, even should be machmir, even if he suffers, if he doesn't wash his mouth, he should be machmir. And therefore, the Minchat Yitzchak brings down smell. He doesn't want to walk around like so. If he has tsar, we said again, it only when he has a real tsar gadol, and with that also would be for mouthwash, using mouthwash. That issur is that some say because you're gonna might get inside your body, which is davar asur, and some say like Rav Moshe says in Masot Moshe that just like you're not allowed to wash any part of your body, part of that as well is brushing or washing your mouth. This is also body parts that are not allowed to be washed, and therefore, lemaaseh, one should try to avoid brushing his mouth unless it's a tsar gadol. This is the next thing we're talking about. We said asur berchitza, sicha, nilat asandal, tashmish hamita, asur likro b'Torah neviim v'ktuvim. All things are not allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. You're not allowed to learn Torah, not allowed to learn Nevi'im, you're not allowed to learn Ktuvim, Mishnah, Gemara, Midrash, Halachot, Agadot. All that brings you happiness, and one needs to make sure that he doesn't learn any of that because it's Asur on Tisha B'Av. And the only things that will be mutar are those things that have tsar learning them, which means you learn Gemarot that speak about Avelut, like in Elu Megalchin, that those Gemarot that speak about Avelut or Halachot of Avelut, or the Gemarot in Perek HaNezakin in Gittin that speak about the Chorban Beit, or one that wants to learn the Midrash Shecha. Those things one is allowed to learn because those bring a person tsar. When he learns them, they're not actually under the Pikudei Hashem Esharim Mesam Chelev. That would be mutar to learn. How about reading Tehillim? The majority of Peskim say you're not allowed to read Tehillim on Tisha B'Av. Mishnah Berurah brings that although there are places that the minhag is to read Tehillim, but in the city of Pozna he says that the minhag is not so, and rather they would read the Tehillim on the next day after Tisha B'Av, what they missed out on Tisha B'Av, which means some people have a certain seder, they read a certain amount of Tehillim every single day. There are others that would do every day. There's a group of people, they read a certain amount of Tehillim, they read a certain amount of Shir HaShirim, whatever it is they took upon themselves, and they do it on regular basis. On Tisha B'Av, one should not do such a thing. It says over here, and that's the way they did in Pozna. They would take whatever they were obligated to say on Tisha B'Av and say it the next day. Rav Eliashiv said that if you do such a thing and you're doing it for a sgula, every day you're reading a certain amount of Shir HaShirim, sgula for getting married, somebody that does Tehillim, sgula for other things, all kinds of sgulot. Those sgulot should be put hold on Tisha B'Av, and the next day they should do and complete yesterday as well, which means they read twice, and the Sgula will still be applicable. This will be still something that would come. And therefore, one needs to be careful with that. Although Chacham Ovadia brought those that are Mekel, like Leket Yosher, that says that one is allowed to read Tehillim on Tisha B'Av, and that this is how Chazon Ovadia, Chacham Ovadia is posek. But since majority of the poskim don't agree with that, like the Or Letzion, Kaf HaChaim, we saw the Mishnah Berurah, and the Binyan Olam says that it's not a good minhag to read Tehillim. And the reason for that is because the Tehillim has some mizmorim that are derech shirot v'tishbachot. They're not only bakashot. Some Tehillim are prayers. So prayers is not sur on Tisha B'Av, but other Tehillim has in it singing. Such a thing is not allowed on Tisha B'Av. Therefore, according to all that, really one should be careful not to read Tehillim on Tisha B'Av if possible. Another thing that people could do on Tisha B'Av, and that is read Divrei Musar. When you have Sfarim of Musar, if you want to learn in them, that is fine. Like for instance, Mesilat Yesharim and things like that. Since you're learning Musar, that would be Mutar. This is how it's brought down in few Sfarim, in Neve Shalom, in Rav Chaim Falaji. He said that it's Mutar to learn Musar, and Lemaise he says that Yesh להתיישב בזה, Mutar or it's Asur. Some wanted to say that it should be Asur to learn Musar, but since we have over here a lot of poskim like the Machzor Viteri, Gesher HaChaim, that say that for Avel even is allowed to learn Musar, so therefore one could allow himself that as long as he's not learning it in a way that's going to be Mesameach Halev again, which means sometimes you can take that Musar and go in depth into it. So even Dvarim HaMutarim to learn, as it says in the Shulchan Aruch, all these things that we said, Mutar Lilmod Midrashecha, Elu Megalchin, Nilmod Perushecha, Perush Eyov, all that as well, but even that, the Mishnah Berurah writes, Hainu sheilmad bepshutam shim, not learn it bederech pilpul, like he's learning Torah with questions and answering all kind of answers. One should not do that. Rather, you learn it exactly what it says, understand, and keep on going. You could build up over here a good question and a good answer. This is not the correct time to do that. And when we're learning the Torah, the reason machloket in the poskim we considered in learning Torah. Chazal said instead of learning those things, one should learn dvarim hametzarim, dvarim hakashim, and therefore they just told you the way how to learn and what to learn. Or do we say that Tisha B'Av is not a day that you're obligated to learn Torah altogether? And what Chazal said is that instead of sitting, doing nothing, this is okay to learn, but you're not even obligated to do that. So therefore, that would be a difference between if a person could go and lie down and rest, although he's not tired, he could sit down doing nothing, or do we say that he is obligated in learning Torah, and therefore he's obligated to learn those things? If we say that it's a regular day, just like any other day of the year, that one is obligated to learn Torah, just Chazal told you, instead of learning what you regularly learn in the Gemara, come and learn it today in Dvarim HaMetzarim. That is something that one has to do, and he can't just sit doing nothing. But if we're saying that one is not obligated, and Chazal only told you that instead of doing nothing, if you want to do something, you could learn that. So therefore, according to that, you're not going to be be obligated to learn those things. But when you are not learning Torah, what are you supposed to do? If we're not going to say Tehillim, and we're not going to learn Torah, and we are not going to learn the Musar, so some people who pick up a newspaper, it's that davar mutar to pick up a newspaper or books and read them on those days. So do we say that you're not allowed to read the books on those days? We have on that a machloket. Some say, like for instance, take a look at Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky. He says that of course it's not allowed to open up a newspaper on Tisha B'Av because it's asur because those things are masiach dat min avelut. Just like you're not allowed to do any other thing that would take your mind off the avelut of Tisha B'Av, you're not allowed on the same token to do that as well, that you'll take a newspaper and you start going through it and enjoying it and getting your mind off the avelut. That is davar asur, and what he says is dvarim hamistabrim. But in Chazon Ovadia, he doesn't write like that. He says that likro chadashot mitoch iton yomi, or lishmoa chadashot baradio, one who wants to open up the radio and hear the news, nireh shemutar, he says that it's allowed. So if one, for instance, picks up his phone, he wants to look at news, he has news over there, that would be, according to Chacham Ovadia, mutar. And although the Maharsha says that one should be machmir for the reasons we explained before, that it's masiach dat min avelut, but many of the poskim don't say like the Maharsha, rather they say that the isur of doing whatever it is restricted is because it's masameach lev. You're not allowed to learn Torah because it's masameach lev. So therefore, if you open up something that's not masameach lev, you open up a book and you're going to read over there history, biology. That's not mesameach lev. You want to open up the newspaper or open the radio and listen to the news. That's not mesameach lev. According to Chacham Ovadia, those poskim would hold that it's davar mutar. Rashi says, for instance, you're not allowed to walk outside for a tiyul, just to walk by and enjoy the day, because how could you be mekel rosh on Tisha B'Av? How could you have a light head on Tisha B'Av? Tisha B'Av is a serious day. Why don't you sit down, think about what happened, learn about what happened? So according to that comes out again that according to Rashi, one for the same token would not allowed also to open up some books and start reading about what happened, what happens in the world, where that is not something that has to do with Tisha B'Av. Therefore, it seems like even that one should try to be restricted, unless he wants to rely on Chacham Ovadia, and then he permits it. How about when you see your friend? When you see your friend, the halacha says you're not allowed to say shalom. You're not allowed to say hello to your friend. Shalom. En she'elat shalom lechavero b'tisha b'av. On Tisha B'Av, one is not allowed to say shalom to his friend. When you see your friend on the road, you don't say shalom. And if he didn't know and he told you shalom, so you can answer him b'safa raka or rafa uvechoved rosh, which means in the seriousness you answer him, but not with a happy smile that you saw him. And that is something that not necessarily would apply of saying hello, because some of the poskim would say that shalom and hello are two different things. And for instance, the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Berurah brings down that one should not say also tzafra tava, a good morning. You're not allowed to say good morning. But good morning is asur. Could be that saying goodbye would be mutar. This is how it's brought down in Rav Shlomo Zalman. This is how it's brought down in Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky, to say goodbye, not necessarily that it's davar asur. Could be that this will be davar hamutar. And how about when you see a friend, usually you either say hello or you nod in your head as you're saying hello. That is davar hamutar. This is how it seems like it says in the Ritva, that brings that למדנו כי אבל מותר לשחוט בתוך זין כדרך ששוחין נותנים שלום. אבל, לא עלינו, in the time of אבלות, is allowed to nod his head as to say hello to his friend, and that is mutar, because this is not considered like saying shalom. It's expressing hello, but it's not saying shalom. Therefore, such a thing would be mutar. If you take a look at Salmat Chaim, he doesn't permit such a thing. He says that this should be asur. On Tisha B'Av, one is allowed to say mazal tov. You see your friend, he tells you, I had a baby boy. You're allowed to say mazal tov to your friend. Mazal tov is a bracha. Saying a bracha is mutar, although there are those that want to say that even saying mazal tov should be restricted, or should be avoided rather. Not restricted, avoided. When we're saying that you're allowed to say good night or good morning, the Mishnah Berurah said you're not allowed to say good morning. But if you take a look at the Be'er Moshe and Betzel HaChokhmah, they bring a lot of proofs. But the Be'er Moshe brings a lot of proof that one is allowed to say good morning on Tisha B'Av and good night, and he's allowed to say hello when he sees your friend. The only thing that's asur is shalom. But we said already the Mishnah Berurah was posek that saying good morning, tzafrat hava, should be avoided. Whenever you see your friend, you could and you're allowed and you should ask him how he's doing on the Ta'anit. Some people are having a hard time on the Ta'anit fasting. You should be concerned about your friend. That's not something that's asur finding out. You're not allowed to say shalom, but you're telling him how's your Ta'anit is going. That is fine. And you're allowed to give him a bracha, telling him that he should live a long life and he should be well. Those things are permitted. You're allowed on Tisha B'Av to go visit somebody who's sick, and maybe it's the right time to visit somebody who's sick and to show him that you're concerned about him. This is a summary of saying shalom to your friend. Now, there's another thing that we need to talk about, and that is sitting down. When we said that on Tisha B'Av they are restricted, some of the things are restricted from Chazal, and some are minhagim. So those things that we spoke about before, most of them were Chazal restrictions, which means when we said in the halacha, in the very first halacha in Tafkuf Nun Dalet, asur berchitza, sicha, nilat asandal, tashmish hamita, likro b'Torah. This is things that asur meikar adin. Then you have things that people are noheg to do, and this is, for instance, sitting on chairs. It says in the halacha, in Tafkuf Nun Tet, Gimel, one should not sit on a chair on Tisha B'Av until midday. By midday, he could sit on a chair, and rather he should sit on a chair to show that it's time of Nechama, because that's the time that the Beit HaMidrash started to get burnt, and we're showing Nechama that Hashem got angry, and instead of taking his anger on Am Yisrael, he took and burned etzim v'avanim, he burned the Beit HaMikdash. And therefore, on Chatzot, midday, one should sit on the chair. But beforehand, one should sit on the floor, and even small children should sit on the floor because they have this din of chinuch. Up to the age about 6, 7, they could be lenient. After that, there's a din of chinuch that children need to know that this is not what we do on Tisha B'Av. We don't sit on chairs, we sit on the floor. Now, when you're sitting on the floor, the halacha says that you should have something in between you and the floor. Don't sit straight on the floor. This is how the Mekubalim bring down. It's mentioned in the Shaarei Tshuva, Siman Tafkuf Nuntet, and he says that although the Ma'aril sat on the floor itself, nothing in between him and the floor, but בשם הרש האריה, שעל פי הקבלה, according to Kabbalah, אין לשב להדיא, רק יפסיק בבגד שאינו לבוש בו, which means you put some kind of clothing that you don't wear between you and the floor. And this is how the minhag is, not to sit straight on the floor. When you're sitting on the floor, how high could that be in order to permit such a thing? Ben Ish Chai says that since the minhag is to sit on the floor, you could sit on something that is not a tefach high. Tefach is about 10 centimeters. So put something on the floor. You don't have to sit straight on the floor. You could put something that's not the size of a hand, 10 centimeters, and no gavoa tefach. That is the shiur that the Ben Ish Chai brings. But others say, like the Chazon Ish, that you can go up to 3 tefachim. As long as you don't have 3 tefachim, that is fine. Rav Shlomo Zalman wrote that it's not really written openly in the halacha that it needs to be a certain height. Rather, as long as it's a low chair, that is davar mutar. So you don't have to go and start measuring your chairs. So Shlomo Zalman says, just make sure that it's much lower than a regular chair, that it's visible and it's showing, it's expressing that you're not sitting on a regular comfortable chair, rather somewhere very low. And many times you'll see that there are people that find in the shul a seat right by the steps where they go into the hechal. Over there, it's very comfortable to sit because it's pretty high, although it's not a regular height where you normally sit, but it's pretty high and it's comfortable to sit on such a thing. With that davar mutar, so it's brought down in some of the Sfarim. For instance, in Makor Chaim, he says that these steps are considered like a regular floor, and therefore one that wants to sit on them, that's permitted and it's fine. Especially if one is sick or old or pregnant woman that can't sit, she's allowed to sit, or they're allowed to sit on regular chairs, because we're not dealing over here that people should suffer when they sit on the floor. So somebody who's older, somebody who's sick, as we said now, or any other reason that it's not yeshiva of ta'anug. Everything is again coming back to ta'anug. It's not a yeshiva of ta'anug, such a thing would be mutar. And therefore, for instance, if one is driving a car, you're allowed to sit on the chair in the car, or to sit on your seat. Why is that? Because it's not yeshiva shel ta'anug. This is how Zaman Orbach says. This is how Shmuel Kominetsky says. This is how Chachav Ovadia brings down. And again, whenever you're sitting down in such a place, since it's not yeshiva shel ta'anug, it will be mutar. And therefore, Rav Eliashiv says that if you have to take the bus, you have to take the train, you don't have to stand. Do you have to stand? Maybe if you have a chance not to sit down, you could stand. So you stand in a bus or in a train. It's fine if people stand up. So do you have to stand up, or you could sit down? They say that you're allowed to sit down because, again, it's not yeshiva shel ta'anug, and this is something that's accepted also from Rav Chaim Kanievsky and from the Chazon Ish. Interesting halacha that on Tisha B'Av, when you're sitting on the floor, you see an older person passing by, one doesn't need to stand up for them. Very interesting, because normally it's a chiyuv deoraita to stand up for a Talmid Chacham or for an older person that's over the age of 70. So now that you see him, why is it that you're not going to need to stand up for him? There's two opinions to explain that. The Levush says that the reason is because you tarud betzaro, which means a person that is avel, as the Shulchan Aruch says over there in Yoreh De'ah Shinayin Vav. He says that avel does not need to stand for a nasi. So therefore, what would be the reason? Because he's tarud betzaro, says the Levush. He has constantly now tzar. So such a person, when he's tarud, is bothered with his pain, doesn't need to stand. The other Sfarim, like the Shvut Yaakov, say that the reason is because it's not the only time that the Torah said that one needs to stand is kima shel hidur. You're standing up to honor the other the other person in a place that's honorable, which means it's a place that you could stand over here and show respect to the other person. That is something that's considered kima shel kavod. For instance, if a person would see a rabbi in the Beit house, in the mikveh, and he's sitting down, doesn't need to stand over there because it's not a makom of kavod. You don't need to stand for such for when you see them coming in. And therefore, over here as well, since Avel in this time is not in a place that is honorable, is makom kavod, is time of kavod, he doesn't need to stand. So over here as well, on Tisha B'Av, we would say that it's not makom of kavod. We can say also that it's not is tarud betzaro. We can argue on each reason, but lemaise the halacha would be that he doesn't have to stand up on Tisha B'Av, and this is how Rabbi Akiva Eiger brings down that one doesn't need to stand up on Tisha B'Av. The Gilyon Maharsha brings that as well, and the Igrot Moshe, and with the exception again that one doesn't need to sit down on the floor if it becomes very hard for him. Like for instance, if a woman is pregnant, if a woman is nursing, once she feels that it's very hard, she doesn't have to sit on the floor. Now remember that the halacha in the Shulchan Aruch, he brings down such words. That's how he ends up the Halachot in Taf Kuf Nun Dalet of Tisha B'Av, and he says that Kol ha'ochel v'shoteh b'Tisha B'Av eno roeh b'simchat Yerushalayim. one that eats or drinks on Tisha B'Av would not get to see the happiness, to rejoice in Simchat Yerushalayim when Beit HaMikdash will be built and Yerushalayim would be again built up. וכל המתאבל על ירושלים זוכה ורואה בשמחתה. A person that mourns over Yerushalayim would see the happiness of ירושלים. וכל האוכל בשר או שותה יין בסעודה המפסקת, עליו הכתוב אומר, ותהי עוונם על עצמותם. One that eats or drinks wine and meat on the סעודה המפסקת, which Chazal restricted at the time of the סעודה המפסקת, that the pasuk comes to say that the bones would be, the sins would be on their bones. And the Mishnah Berurah adds over here that כל האוכל ושותה אפילו מעוברת או מניקה או שאר אנשים שהם חלושים בטבעם ומצטערים בתענית אם לא מישהו חולה באמת. Really, in reality, a חולה is patur. Anybody is considered חולה, sick, is patur. We explained that doesn't have to be really sick with a fever and things like that, that's definitely patur. But even somebody who's feeling that he has to lie down, he has a din of chole already. Some wanted to say, as we explained before, that even when you feel weaker than the regular, like for instance, Moshe says that a person that goes to work is allowed to go to work, although he knows that it could be that at a certain point you are not going to be able to feel regular anymore. You feel weaker than the regular because he went to work. And although he's going to feel that way, he could go to work. Once he feels that weak, more than the regular weakness that a person feels during a ta'anit, he's patur from the fasting, he can start eating. But that is a chole. What about me'uberet umenika? Those are obligated to fast on Tisha B'Av. Unlike other fasts that mentioned in the Katuv, me'uberet umenika, many hold that they're not obligated to fast. Except obviously with the fast of Yom Kippur that everybody has to fast. But on Tisha B'Av, it's more strict than the other fasts, and those Me'uberet Umenika would have to go ahead and fast on those days, unless they are exempt because either complications or, for instance, the Me'uberet, the pregnant lady, would feel weaker than the regular. She would have any reason that the doctor would say, for that reason for you, it's not so advised to fast, and then she would have to go and ask the rabbi and see if that thing that he told her would apply over here. And if a woman feels that way, she would be able to eat on Tisha B'Av. How about menika, a woman that is nursing her child? Normally, if she can find something else to give the child a formula or prepare bottles for him, and he would take it and would be satisfied with it, that is fine. But if she's only nursing and she can't replace that with something else for the day, then she's allowed to feed the baby and she's allowed to eat in order to be able to have that food for the baby. If a woman is afraid that she's going to lose her milk, a whole day of not nursing, maybe the milk would get less. So therefore, the Chazon Ish said that she would be allowed to eat on Tisha B'Av. Now, when they eat on Tisha B'Av, whoever eats on Tisha B'Av cannot eat regular food that he would eat on a regular day. He would put himself juice, coffee, and eat all kind of good things. Rather, he needs to eat simple food, whatever's needed. If coffee is needed for the headache for that person, so that's one thing. But you can't just drink juice and drink good things and eat good food. Rather, it needs to be simple. Keep everything simple, and that's the way those that are permitted could eat. Unless, again, we're having a woman that needs to feed the baby and simple food will not provide her the food needed, so then she would be allowed to eat whatever she needs in order to give the baby. Now, it's worthwhile to end up with what the Mishnah Berurah ends up and says, כדאי הוא בית אלוקינו להצטער על חורבנו על כל פנים יום אחד בשנה. The Beit HaMikdash is worth at least one day in a year that one should mourn over and feel the pain and feel how terrible it is that we're still in Galut for so many years. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we hope that next year already will be in Yerushalayim Abnuya.